Hi everyone, this is my new reaction video to crime documentary video. So don't waste the time, let's go.
Hello everyone, my name is David. Today we are going to take a look at another real story with you. This story is about negligence and it highlights how carelessness can escalate. Usually when a person dies, whether at home, in a hospital, in an accident, or under suspicious circumstances, a post-mortem makes things clear. It confirms whether there's any doubt whether it was a natural death or caused by some illness or condition. However, many deaths happen at home where there's no need to go to the hospital or see a doctor, so a post-mortem isn't usually done, unless the family suspects something. Only then does a post-mortem become necessary. So what does a post-mortem actually mean? Usually, post-mortems are done in hospital mortuaries, but sometimes they're even done outside in open areas near those rooms. A post-mortem involves opening parts of the body, whether it's the head, chest, or any vital organ like the stomach area or heart. The reason for doing this is to determine the exact cause of death, when it happened, and how it happened. Post-mortem reveals all of that. Now just think for a moment. Imagine a person whose post-mortem has already been done. The doctor has given the post-mortem report and written down the cause of death. After that, the body is handed over to the family. They take it to the cremation ground. The wood is arranged. The pyre is ready. All that's left is to place the body on the pyre. But right at that moment, the people with the body notice that the person's eyes have opened. Their breathing has resumed. They touch the hand and realize the pulse is still active. The body is warm. Many people step back in fear, but then some realize there's nothing to be afraid of and move closer. They see that the man is actually alive. After that, they take him back to the hospital, and the doctor checks and confirms, yes, he's alive. Now just think, what could be more unbelievable than this? A dead person, someone who has already gone through a post-mortem, comes back to life even after that. It's truly astonishing. And this isn't a joke, it actually happened. This story is from Junjunu, Rajasthan. In Junjunu, Rajasthan, there lives a 25-year-old young man named Rohitash. Rohitash is an orphan and is deaf and mute. He can neither speak nor hear. Being an orphan, he used to live in an orphanage in Junjunu itself. It was Thursday, November 21st. Around 1 p.m. that day, he suddenly fell ill. When his condition worsened, the people at the orphanage decided to take him to the hospital. They brought him there and he was taken to the emergency ward. The name of the hospital is known as BDK Hospital in Junjunu. Rohitash was taken to the emergency ward there. The doctors came and checked his pulse. It was missing. They did an ECG. After that, a report came. Whether they saw it properly or not is unclear. Rohitash had fallen ill around 1 p.m. and by about 1:50 p.m. he was taken to the hospital. After checking his pulse and doing the ECG within 20 minutes, at around 2:10 p.m., the doctor declared that Rohitash had died. No pulse, no heartbeat, no signs of life. He was declared dead. As soon as the doctor said he had died. So what was to be done next? The hospital staff came and said to take him to the mortuary so a post-mortem could be done. According to the written timeline, he was brought to the hospital at 1:50 p.m., declared dead by the doctors at 2:10 p.m., and by 2:30 p.m., Rohitash's body was taken to the hospital mortuary. There, his body was placed in a deep freezer, where the temperature is below zero. His body was put inside that freezer. There's even a photo of him in that freezer. That's where he was kept. And this is a government hospital. After placing the body in the freezer, it was said that the doctor would come and perform the post-mortem. So the timeline goes like this. Death was declared at 2:10 p.m., and by 2:30 p.m., the body was placed in the deep freezer. For the next 2 hours, Rohitash, assumed to be dead, lay inside that deep freezer where the temperature was well below zero. He remained there until 4:30 p.m. Then, after 2 hours, the doctor finally arrived and said, let's begin the post-mortem. At 4:30 p.m., the body was taken out of the freezer and moved into the mortuary room. And in just 15 minutes, the door to the morgue opened. The post-mortem was completed in only 15 minutes. After that, the dead body was brought out on a trolley. The body, wrapped in a blanket, was handed over to the people who had come with Rohitash. The police were present, they completed the formalities, and told them they could proceed with the last rites. The people who were with Rohitash couldn't wait for anyone else, so they took the body to the cremation ground. Once there, preparations for the funeral pyre began. Wood was bought and arranged. The body was still wrapped in a blanket. The government hospital's ambulance brought the body, and it was taken down and placed to the side, while the pyre was being prepared. And just as the funeral pyre was fully prepared, it was time to lift the body and place it on the pyre. But suddenly, as the people stepped forward to lift the body, they noticed that Rohitash's eyes were open, even though they had been closed at the hospital. They were surprised and thought, what's going on? But then assumed maybe sometimes a dead person's eyes open on their own. Still, when they lifted the body and touched it, the blanket shifted a bit, and they realized his body was warm, even though a dead body is usually cold. Then they heard the sound of breathing. They looked closely and saw he was actually breathing. When they held his hand, they felt a pulse. When this happened, persons started shouting. The 8-10 others who were there came closer and asked what was going on. Someone said, he's alive. Others responded, he must be crazy. And some even got scared, thinking maybe it was a ghost. But then some responsible people came closer and noticed that his eyelids were blinking, and it seemed like he was trying to say something. When everyone saw all of this, his pulse, his breath, and even faint sounds, people started screaming in shock. They immediately picked him up, put him into a vehicle, and rushed him back to the same hospital. This was the same hospital where, just about an hour or an hour and a half earlier, Rohitash had already undergone a post-mortem. When they reached the hospital, they told the doctor, sir, he's alive. Now, just imagine what must have gone through the mind of the doctor who had just performed a post-mortem on this man. And now, that same man had come back to the hospital alive. Doctors immediately rushed to the emergency room and checked him. They saw that he really did have a pulse, his heart was beating. But his condition wasn't stable because he had spent nearly 2 hours in a deep freezer. He remained in the emergency room for a few hours, and then the doctor said, look, he needs advanced care. Take him to Jaipur, to a major government hospital there. From there, he was put in an ambulance and sent to Jaipur that night. By the time they reached Jaipur, it was quite late, around 1 a.m. Now the date had changed to November 22nd. The incident had started on November 21st, but by the time they arrived at the government hospital in Jaipur, it was 1 a.m. on the 22nd. He was admitted to the emergency ward and treatment began. But exactly 4.5 hours later, at 5:30 in the morning, the doctors at the Jaipur government hospital finally declared once again that he had died. No pulse, no heartbeat. This time, the attending doctor thoroughly checked him multiple times and said, he's definitely dead now. When they informed the doctor that this was the same person who had been declared dead the previous evening, had already undergone a post-mortem, and then came back to life, only to now die again. The Jaipur doctor laughed and said, what nonsense are you talking about? How can someone who's already had a post-mortem come back to life? He added, when a post-mortem is done, the body is cut open and then stitched back. There's no way a person could survive that. And on top of that, there were no stitches on his body, no signs of cuts or surgery anywhere. The people couldn't understand what was going on. And the poor guy, an orphan, deaf and mute, couldn't explain anything himself. So they said, let's just go now. On November the 22nd, within 24 hours, Rohitash's funeral pyre was prepared once again, and this time when they laid him on the pyre, his eyes didn't open. There was no heartbeat, no pulse. His final rites were completed. After all of this, the people returned. When they got back, the authorities at the orphanage found out about what had happened. They were deeply shocked and went to the hospital, asking, "Sir, please tell us what really happened here." They said, "You declared a living person dead, or how did a dead person come back to life? We need answers. And how can someone come back to life after a post-mortem has already been done?" At that point, the post-mortem report was pulled out and reviewed. The doctor's report stated that Rohitash died due to respiratory failure and had a lung infection. He was suffering from tuberculosis. According to the report, TB and lung issues caused his death. But beyond that, there were no details about what body parts were examined, which organs were checked, or what samples were taken during the post-mortem. None of that was mentioned in the report. It was as if any ordinary doctor had just written a general note. You have TB, breathing problems, your lungs are damaged. But a real post-mortem report doesn't work like that. A proper post-mortem report includes detailed findings. What parts of the body were opened, what was examined, and what samples were preserved. Here there was nothing. Just a superficial post-mortem report. Since the orphanage staff had also gotten involved, the matter reached the district collector of Junjunu. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the situation had now become serious. After all, a person who was declared dead had come back to life. Even after the post-mortem, chaos broke out. On one side, panic spread, and on the other, the CMO, Chief Medical Officer of Hospital, got involved. A full inquiry was launched. Once the investigation began, the real story that came out was quite strange. Here's what actually happened. Rohitash had come to the hospital sick. Around 1 p.m. he had a seizure. It turned out that he often suffered from epilepsy and would usually recover after being given medication. That day too, he had a seizure and lost consciousness during it. He was brought to the hospital's emergency room. The doctor checked his pulse. Later, the doctor himself admitted that sometimes the pulse becomes so faint, it disappears for an hour or more and can return later. So if any doctor today declares someone dead just based on the pulse, there's nothing more misleading than that. Because in today's time, the most basic and reliable technology to determine whether someone is alive or dead is the ECG. If you perform an ECG, it will show any activity in the body. Even the slightest movement or signal from any part of the body will be reflected. And if the ECG shows a completely flat line, it clearly means the person is no longer alive. But even the tiniest fluctuation up or down means there's still life, because ECG doesn't lie. So the question is, fine, the doctor couldn't find a pulse, that's understandable. And it's also said that an ECG was done, but when the ECG report came, the doctor didn't even have time to look at it. He believed, I'm a doctor, who knows better than me. He had already checked the pulse and made a judgment. Like in the old days, when traditional healers used to diagnose just by observing the patient or feeling a pulse, similarly, he relied on that alone. But these days, whether it's a small clinic or a big hospital, the moment you describe any symptoms, doctors immediately prescribe a bunch of tests. That itself is a huge scam. Only after the tests do they tell you what's wrong. In the past, things weren't like that. Anyway, in this case, the doctor checked the pulse and declared, there's no pulse, he's dead. Then an ECG was done, but the doctor never bothered to look at the ECG report. Later, when the truth came out and that very ECG from the afternoon was reviewed, it clearly showed several live signals. It wasn't a flat line. But the doctor hadn't checked it. He was overconfident. He assumed, he's just an orphan, deaf and mute. If he dies, let him die. Once the doctor said it, he considered it final. Even though the ECG clearly showed the man was alive, the doctor trusted only his own method of checking the pulse and had the body placed in a deep freezer, saying, take him to the morgue, we'll do the post-mortem later. He didn't even bother to look at the ECG. If he had, who knows? Rohitash might still be alive today. So here we have a living person, confirmed alive by the ECG, who was locked inside the deep freezer of that hospital's morgue, where the temperature was around minus 10 to 20 degrees Celsius. And he remained locked in there for 2 full hours. Now just think, if he was still alive at that point, what must those 2 hours in the freezer have done to him? After 2 hours, the doctor finally decides to deal with the case, probably thinking, let's get this over with, there are other things to do. Maybe some party or function, because that's how the story feels. At 2:30 p.m. he was put in the freezer. At 4:30 p.m. they took him out. By 4:30 the body was moved into the mortuary, and exactly at 4:45 p.m. the door of the post-mortem room was opened. Rohitash's body was placed on a trolley, wrapped in a blanket. Within just 15 minutes the body went in. Everything was done. Within 15 minutes the entire post-mortem was supposedly completed. His body was opened, stitches were done, organ samples were supposedly taken. Everything, all in 15 minutes. It was as if the whole thing was done in a robotic, mechanical way, like magic. After that, the body was handed over to the family, and the post-mortem report was also given. But when the truth came out, it was this. The doctor took the body into the mortuary, but never actually performed the post-mortem. A fake post-mortem certificate was created. If a real post-mortem had been done, Rohitash would have died right there on the table. He wouldn't have made it to the cremation ground alive. Think about it. If the post-mortem had actually been performed, those doctors would have been cutting open a living person. Just imagine that. So, in a way, thanks to their cheating, forgery, and unethical behavior, even though they violated their professional duty, they at least didn't commit murder by actually doing the post-mortem. Because if they had done it properly, it would have amounted to murder. Instead, to cover things up, they pretended to do the post-mortem, wrote a fake certificate, made up a post-mortem report, and declared a false cause of death. But the full details that are usually written in a proper post-mortem report were missing. Nothing was recorded. Why? Because they knew he was a deaf and mute laborer, a poor orphaned young man. Who would come asking questions for him? So they just wrote something, handed over the body, and closed the case. Now think about it. A living person was kept in the freezer for 2 hours. A living person was taken to the mortuary and laid on the post-mortem table. But despite all this negligence, the only thing they didn't do, thankfully, was actually carry out the post-mortem. If they had, he wouldn't have survived. And that's the only reason he lived long enough to be taken out and later sent to Jaipur. When all of this came to light, how a living man was declared dead. ECG wasn't even checked. He was placed in a deep freezer. A fake post-mortem report was issued, and then he came back to life only to later die in Jaipur. Once the news spread, authorities jumped into action. The district collector got involved, saying, this is a complete violation of humanity. After that, the hospital's CMO, the doctor who had signed the post-mortem report, and the doctor who had initially declared him dead just by checking the pulse, all were suspended. But the question is suspension enough? Shouldn't such people be permanently banned from practicing medicine? Because it wasn't just negligence, it was a serious failure of ethics and responsibility. In fact, people like this should be sent straight to jail so that it serves as a lesson. Today they've only been suspended, fine, but tomorrow they could be working at another hospital. This one story reveals so much. It shows that in some countries, if you leave out the big cities, the condition of government hospitals in remote towns and villages is deeply concerning. There are barely any doctors, and in some places none at all. So many deaths happen in such hospitals. And who knows how many unethical practices go unnoticed? How many innocent living people might have been declared dead? How many dead bodies were given post-mortem certificates without any real post-mortem? What all must be happening that no one knows about? And who can say how many living people might have already had post-mortems performed on them? That's exactly what this story suggests. What could be more painful and disturbing than this? Doctors are supposed to be our last hope. Doctors, whom we still trust blindly. Doctors whom we still regard as gods. Doctors whose words we follow without question. No one ever tells a doctor, please prescribe a cheaper medicine, or give us a discount on your fee. We pay whatever the doctor charges. We take the medicines they prescribe without hesitation. The least a doctor can do is not betray that trust. It's heartbreaking to think of the man who suffered all this, from being locked in a deep freezer to being laid on a post-mortem table, despite still being alive. That was the sad story. So this was today's story.
So this is very amazing story. I hope like this. So don't forget to subscribe. Bye bye.